whoever you are, wherever you are, hope you are blessed and doing safe. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings, family. Of course, I'm tuning in. You see me without the glasses off today, but if you're looking for some opportunities, particular advertisement opportunities, then look no further at the link at the bottom to my email address. You can hit me up for advertisement opportunities. We are supporting and promoting your businesses here on this channel. You can also, if you would like to donate and subscribe to our Patreon, a link is at the bottom as well. So you have multiple ways in which you can advertise with the platform by emailing me when we go on through our live stream. You also have access to premium content, those that want to see premium content that you will not find here on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, as I am suspended probably by now. You guys can check out the Patreon at link at the bottom. But advertisement opportunities, definitely email me, gavin.grich1@gmail.com for rates. And for the Patreon, it is the same as the YouTube channel. It is channel gboot2786. All right, I'll holla. Peace. She was a lady who sang the blues. Billie Holiday lived a dynamic life, but also a tragic one, and met a tragic end at the age of 44, where she supposedly died of cirrhosis of the liver. However, at that time, she was under investigation by the Department of Justice of the United States, led by a vehement racist who went after her over her song, Strange Fruit. That song became an anthem for national civil rights, black civil rights across this country. And interesting enough, it was written by a Jewish songwriter. Most people may or may not know that, but renewed interest has come forward as a result of Billie Holiday's, the new movie that is based on Billie Holiday's life called The United States versus Billie Holiday. The song Strange Fruit was composed by Abel Maripol, who was a Jewish songwriter and teacher, and became distraught over the horror of lynchings, inspired by a photograph that was taken in 1930. It's a photograph that was taken by Lawrence Bietler, and it was the lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith. It's actually this photograph here. I'm going to stop and share Billie for a minute, and I'll actually share the photograph, the infamous photograph. And warning, this is graphic, but this is something that is of historic significance and something that African Americans we've all been too familiar with in our history. But it was these gentlemen here, that is Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith, and this song is what inspired their death. While tragic and also grotesque, their death inspired the song Strange Fruit. So there's with all the bad things that have happened and a tragic situation like this, a legacy was also born as a result of that, and something for a good reason. A movement was sparked. And how things, it's funny how things work in life, works out sometimes, is that's while some things happen for bad, there may be a silver lining. Not saying, of course, that there's a silver lining in death. That's not what I'm trying to get at, and murder and lynching, but something positive, at least I can find comfort, came out of that. I wish it could have been another way around. But shout out to everyone in the chat: Cheryl Bryant, One Who Cares, Derek Bailey. Yes, Jazz Fest was canceled this year, as well as several other festivals, several other periods. Yeah, that was canceled too. I don't know if y'all can hear it, but my father has come into the room and is talking. But with me to discuss the death of Billie Holiday, getting back to Billie, and we'll talk more about the song Strange Fruit later in the broadcast. But getting back to Billie, of course, this is Mystery Deaths, Mystery Deaths, a topic that I do with a veteran journalist, Al Lanier. Al is joining us right now. Let me put me on the, my face up there. What's up, everyone? And there's Al Lanier. How you doing, Al?
Hi, how are you? How are you doing?
All right. Doing fine. I'm doing all right. Thank you for joining me tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button as we go in and we talk the mysterious death of the lady who sang, I should say, who sang the blues right there. Of course, everybody knows. I think renewed interest has come up with Billie Holiday as a result of the movie that Andra Day started, The People, the United States versus Billie Holiday. But of course, there was another movie prior to that, 30, I would say 40 something years ago, that starred Diana Ross as Billie Holiday and Richard Pryor and Billy D. Williams. Richard Pryor played Piano Man. And I think Billy D. Williams, I don't know if he was a fictional character, it might have been a fictional character, but he played Billie Holiday's lover in the film. And that inspired, renewed interest in uh, Billie Holiday and her work. But we're going to focus on her death, Al, from research that we've done and also what's come up in the movie, because many people have speculated, and I've talked with a couple of people. One historian, I'll just say, brother, you all know him, and you know him, brother Ron Hurd of We All Be News. He talks about how he suspected Billie Holiday was killed, and she was, attacked over that song. But let's talk about what we know about Billie Holiday. If you have any biographical information you could share with the people.
Well, yeah, she was. I mean, if you do any research into Billie Holiday, for those who are not familiar, her real name, of course, was Eleanor Fagan.
That's right.
And talk about she was born, basic biographical information. April 7th, 1915. That's the basic biographical information. But when you look into the person that came to be known as Billie Holiday,
that's a picture of her right there.
Right. I think when she was young.
There was two. Yeah.
Extremely young. I think one of the things that people should understand about Billie Holiday is she's often seen, whether it's a movie like Lady Sings the Blues, which came out in the early to mid 70s, about 74, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
1972.
Huh?
I believe that came out in 1972, if I'm not mistaken, around that time. Yeah, 1972. Yeah. 5 Academy Award nominations, including Best Actress.
In any event, you have that. What you have is the general image of Billie Holiday as a rather troubled individual, someone who abused alcohol and abused drugs. And I think that's unfortunately the portrait of her that if people get to know of her either on the surface or even to a minor extent further, that's the picture they get, or that's the picture that's been drawn of her, images drawn of her. But I think it's important to understand that what Billie had was a very, very difficult life. Basically, she was born to, I believe it was, 2 individuals who were essentially teenagers at the time. And her mother, basically her father, I should actually say her father, wound up becoming a jazz musician. And he went off and he played with big band. So he was, I would say, I would put him as a sort of modestly successful musician, insofar as he was a working musician, playing with big bands, playing with bands. I believe his name was, if I'm not mistaken, his name was Holiday, which is where she got the Holiday of Billie Holiday.
Right.
Yeah. So Clarence Holiday was the name of Billie Holiday's father, and he was a jazz musician. So again, he was very young. They were teenagers when Billie was born, and he didn't stick around. He went off. Now, Billie's mother, of course, was the one that raised her to some extent. And when I say that this was a difficult childhood, I think that's an understatement. At a very young age, she was sexually assaulted by an individual, a neighbor. And her mother, actually, from what I understand, had walked in, when she came back home, she saw this this individual trying to do this, the neighbor trying to do this. And so Billie, unfortunately, they, I think, alerted authorities, but Billie ended up going off to I think it was eventually going off to a reform school. And for which was hard on her. Reportedly, she had nightmares about this place. So I would say there are Dickensian aspects, actually horrible aspects, but Dickensian aspects. She got out, and I know at one point they were living in Baltimore at one point. They were in Baltimore. Her mother had worked, I believe, from what I understand, my research, she worked for the railroad at one point, and she also opened her own restaurant. But both of them eventually ended up, sadly, working as, I guess the term now would be sex workers.
Well, she was also, yeah, they used to run errands in a brothel. Yeah.
Right. So, Billie was, of course, underage.
Right.
So you're talking about, I believe she was pre-pubescent. So
yeah.
you already have a woman. See, this is why I'm bringing this out. You already have a woman who was violated by someone. And then now she goes to some reform school, which was very hard on her. I guess for her, a very harsh environment. Then later on, she finds herself working as a sex worker with her mother at one point. And this is all before the age of 18. So you're talking about what had to be, in some respects, a horrible life for this young woman at the time. She wasn't quite a woman.
As a kid.
But for this individual. So when you see that, if you look up Billie Holiday, you see that she was a drug addict, and you see that she was alcoholic. Here's what you should understand. To a certain extent, she drank a lot, and she took the drugs that she did as a way for her to cope with the life she had, the life she came from, and the life that she basically had escaped to a great extent. So it wasn't as if, she was a casual. I mean, she may have been attracted to drugs and alcohol like a lot of other people. People can drink casually. Right. It's very easy to become an alcoholic, or at the very least, a heavy alcohol user.
But I think
it's easy to be a drug. But in her case, what you have to understand is that she was, sorry about that, that she was, this was part of her coping mechanism for dealing with these aspects of her life, which is not unusual with people. They, as the term goes, self-medicate, use drugs, use alcohol as a way to not only forget, but I would argue, although I'm not a psychologist, just a former journalist, I would argue not only to forget, but I think to try to forgive themselves, which I think people don't always understand. I think it's a way for them to try to come to terms with and make themselves feel better. I see it as a way of forgiving with some addicts, from my observation. like famous people, because when I look up celebrities and I've looked up famous people, I'm aware of famous people who are on drugs and alcohol. You have to look at the circumstances. Some people just enjoyed it and they got, sadly hooked, and others took it as a way, as a coping mechanism, as a means of forgetting, as a means of being able to live, being able to anesthetize themselves and move on in life. I mean, it's maybe it's something that most people wouldn't want to do, but for them, nothing else seems to work, or nothing else worked. And I think that was the case. Clearly, that was the case when it came to
Well,
Billie Holiday.
it's a fair assessment to say that people who come, they often say hurt people, or
Right?
the Billie hadn't hurt anybody to my knowledge, but
No, she
probably
was hurt. That's one of the things that frustrates me.
No,
I say
what I'm
this as a
saying is
fan of,
hurting
I say
someone
this
else.
as a fan of her. Right.
What
I
I'm
say this
saying,
as someone who was a fan of hers as a kid. Yeah, I think the thread and the pattern I see is that this woman was continually hurt throughout her life.
but what I'm saying is that I was speaking as far as her hurting a third person. I'm saying she was hurt and was hurting herself. That's the point I was making, which is something
Right.
people that deal with drugs, there's as much as I despise people, obviously doing that to themselves because you're harming yourself, but there's a reason why certain people fall to drugs. Even when you look at someone like, various celebrities, you look at someone very similar, obviously, to Billie Holiday. If you look at Richard Pryor, and there are some parallels even with his story, how he grew up in a brothel, and he was
that's right.
He was molested as a little boy himself by some of the clients that came in there. He had issues with his parents. His father was a pimp. His mother ran tricks, and his grandmother was the madam of the brothel. She ran the brothel. Actually, he was real close with her. So
Right.
There's a something that happens in people's childhood. There's trauma, and she certainly went through all of that. Sadly, but and there are other celebrities I can think of that have been through this. We can talk about too that have been through the same thing, similar. But yeah, go through this at a young age is terrible. But then we also have a situation where, in spite of this, she had the voice of an angel, essentially, and that voice propelled her to stardom. So, at what point when she was going through this, and I guess we can talk about her career in music, at what point did she start to change the course and leave, I guess, the streets and started to get into clubs and bookings and so forth?
Well, I believe it was in her teens, obviously, because by the time she was 18, she was already singing in clubs in Harlem. I think they had gone to New York, and she was already singing in clubs in Harlem. And that's when you had a record producer, who I guess officially had discovered her. This guy had seen her at a club and basically discovered her, and that's what eventually began her career in regards to being a recording artist.
Yeah. It says here too, a lot of people may not know this, but she took the name Billie from an actress she admired, and she put that with her
Billy
father.
Dove.
Because
Billy Dove, yeah.
Yeah, her father his real name is Clarence Halliday, but then she changed it to Holiday when she started performing. And I talked about the song Strange Fruit. There's another reason probably why Billie sang that, and I'll get to that later, but it's something that involved her father, who was a World War I veteran. And it's saying that people have actually disputed that paternity, saying that there was another gentleman by the name of Frank DeVisi who may have been her actual father, according to Baltimore archives. But nevertheless, this man is who they say is her father. So I'll stick with that. But I'll talk about that. And I'll talk about the story behind Strange Fruit and why Billie, I think, sung that song. But yeah, she gets discovered, as we say, And uh, the young singer, she teamed up with a neighbor by the name of Kenneth Holland, who was a tenor saxophone player, and they performed at as Grey Dawn at Pod and Jerry's on 133rd Street and the Brooklyn Elks Club. And Billie Holiday and Benny Goodman recalled hearing Billie sing in 1931. So her reputation started to grow, and she was replacing different singers like Monette Moore at different clubs, and a producer by the name of John Hammond had arranged for Billie to make her first recording at age 18 with Benny Goodman, and this was in November of 1933. The two songs were "Your Mother's Son-in-Law" and "Riffin' the Scotch."
Right. Riffin' the Scotch, I believe, was her first single, if I'm not mistaken.
It was her biggest. It was her first hit. Yeah.
Right.
It was her first hit.
It sold at least 5,000 copies, I believe, at the time. So yeah, it was certainly first hit, but it's also, I believe, her first single.
Right. And Son-in-Law sold 300 copies, so they were impressed with her singing style. And Hammond would later say he compared Holiday to Louis Armstrong and said she had a good sense of lyric content at a very young age. He said her singing changed my music taste and my musical life because she was the first girl singer I'd come across who actually sang like an improvising jazz genius. So that's interesting. So
jazz music, as a general rule, was supposed to be somewhat improvisatory as a musical form compared to other kinds of musical forms.
Right. No, I was finished. So her career blossoms. She started making songs with different people. Teddy Wilson, she teamed up with. She had a brief stint with Count Basie. Dozens of others. Artie Shaw. She was actually fired by the Count Basie band. It was a brief stint, and she was one of the first. She became one of the first Black women. She was among the first Black women to work with a white orchestra, which was an unusual arrangement at that moment because let's not forget we also lived during the time of Jim Crow, and she would have the opportunity, to tour full time in the segregated South with a white band leader. And Artie Shaw was known to stick up for her, especially when there were incidents that were involved. For instance, in her autobiography, Holiday described an incident in which she was not permitted to sit on the bandstand with other vocalists because she was Black. Shaw said to her, "I want you on the bandstand like Helen Forrest, Tony Pastor, and everyone else." These were some of her bandmates. And well, not her bandmates, but these were just examples back then. And while touring the South, Holiday would sometimes be heckled by audience members. And she would lose her temper and had to be escorted off the stage. So she was a fighter.
Well, she was, and I think this will get into probably why she was targeted by authorities. She was a rather defiant lady, defiant in terms of the social and cultural taboos of the time. And she was someone who clearly was her own lady in many respects. Now, this is an interesting photo that you have here, because in looking at her life, some people may find this odd for me to say, but here's what I notice when I look at a photo like this. She seems, when she's here with, I guess, her dog, I don't know what kind of dog this is, but
Mister. Looks like I don't think it's a boxer. It might be. Doesn't look like a boxer. Uh,
Here's what I noticed. I mean, I get people may wonder why I noticed, but I noticed that these photos of her with her dog is that she seems quite happy, and it's interesting because when it comes to celebrities and when I research celebrity cases, since I know that's something you like to talk about, and when I look at celebrities, I don't always see celebrities with pets. And it's interesting to me, though, when you look at Billie Holiday, that what you see when you see her, not just with a smile on her face, but seemingly contented and happy, is around her dog. I don't see her contented and happy around men, for example.
yeah.
I'm sure that something will be noted, but I always found that interesting. Maybe most people don't want to note that or don't find that interesting, but I always find it interesting that she's in those photos. She seems just happier, relaxed with her dog there. To be brutally honest, I think her dog or dogs treated her better than a number of men in her life.
Yeah.
That may be a tough thing to say, but I think it's true.
Right. And that's also something I know the movie hinted at. There was an actress that Billie Holiday was close friends with. And it's been speculated that she had lesbian relationships, but she was also married. It's important to note that. And I don't know if you saw the movie, but they talked about the men in her life, the women. Yeah. But she was married. She actually I think she was married twice, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, let's see. But
yeah, she didn't. Her love life was never that
good.
successful, which is
Yeah.
what I point out. Why I point out the dog, hit the pictures of her with dog.
Yeah.
Because I don't. When I was doing research online for this, I'm like, that's one of the things that struck me. I thought, I don't never really see celebrities with their pets, but she just seems so happy and content with that dog or her dog, her pets. And
Right.
some people may find that sad to say, but maybe it's positive. People love their pets. I mean, I know that from people who are pet owners, very deep love for their pets.
Yeah.
But that's the whole other topic. One I don't want to talk about particularly, but not that I have anything against it. It's just not my deal. But the thing about Billie Holiday, when you talk about her as a singer, and this will be coming up probably on one of the more important songs that she did, which was Strange Fruit. She did have a good degree of success starting from, the first single, the 30s, with Riffin' the Scotch.
Right.
In 1937, for example, I think she had about 16 songs that were hits. It was a very successful year for her. But as I noted in regards to Billie earlier, when I talked about her life, yeah, she managed to become a singer. She managed to become a recording artist. She managed to tour. She managed to tour the South, and she managed to tour in general, becoming a becoming a recording artist, and becoming a fairly well-known singer. But that's not going to take away from the sad and harsh chapters of her life. And so
Right.
she found herself very reliant on drugs and alcohol because she could afford them. At one point, she was making, I believe, it was $14 a day working as a singer, which was far more money than, I would argue, it was $14 a day was far more money than a number of African Americans made, let alone African American women.
Yes, indeed. She was Joe Glasper was her husband, I believe, her final husband. But yeah, I was saying the actress that she was friends with that you see in the movie was this actress here for everybody to look at was Tallulah Bankhead. She was
Oh,
yeah, she was a known liberal. That's what they would
oh
say
yeah.
back in the 1930s and 40s. This is one of the yeah, and she was played in the movie, the latest movie that was out there. But
Lula
yes,
Bankhead was a Broadway actress.
real raspy
And,
voice.
yeah, and a quite a yeah.
What you
I
want to
don't.
say? Free spirit?
I'm trying to think. I was going to say free. You just took the words out of my mouth. Free spirit. I would say liberated, somewhat independent woman.
Right.
That's how I would describe her.
Yeah.
A woman who was
I-
very sure of herself.
Right.
No shrinking violet to Lula Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead was not a shrinking violet by any means. Um,
Right.
and so I wanted to discuss at this point, since we're discussing, so we've looked a little at her musical career. I think it's only fair to discuss perhaps the most infamous song that she sang, which was a song called Strange Fruit,
Yes.
which, as
Let's
you
talk
noted
about that.
earlier,
Let's talk about that.
was
Yeah, I
an
did.
anti-lynching song, essentially.
Right. And I'm going to talk about why. One of the reasons why she sung the song too. I mentioned her
Mm-hmm.
father, and I guess it's an important point to make. Her father, Clarence Halliday, if you read here, was, as we stated earlier, was not only a jazz musician, but he was also a veteran of World War One. He
Right.
was exposed to what was called as mustard gas, basically a sulfur compound that was used and thrown on your enemies. And he fell ill with a lung disorder while on tour in Texas. And when he tried to get treatment at the local hospital, he was only allowed in the Jim Crow ward of the Veterans Hospital. And by that point, he contracted pneumonia. He was not given antibiotics, and it killed him. And supposedly, this song was the this song was what inspired or reminded at least Billie uh, of her father's death because her father had gone down south and was exposed to Jim Crow. Now, even though Billie was exposed to Jim Crow as well, but she was reminded of his death as a result of the racism and Jim Crow laws that existed in the South. So we're talking about the infamous song Strange Fruit, which, if you all saw the movie, but the movie The United States versus Billie Holiday, that was the
Right.
center and basis of why the United States government came after her. The song nowadays, it's played, well, I wouldn't say it's played all the time, but it is certainly played now, I think, more openly, with more open mindedness than it was back in the 1930s and 40s. And so,
Right.
Strange Fruit, right. I'm
Well,
trying to,
here's the thing. Here's the thing. Strange Fruit, which I think came out in 1939, and I
yes,
think it reached like number 16 on the charts back then. Charted at number 16, I think, at the highest point. Strange Fruit was a controversial song. And it was a controversial song because of its content. Now, let me just quote uh, some lyrics of the song so that people have an idea of how this song could easily rile some members of the American populace or offend racists and white supremacists, and even those who weren't necessarily, but were still uncomfortable with it. So here are some lyrics from Strange Fruit. Southern leaves bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. So what's important about what I just read there is the imagery.
Right. And it's this photograph right here, Al. I shared this earlier. Again, it's graphic, but this is also history, unfortunately. Thomas Ship and Abram Smith were the strange fruit that inspired Abel Meeropol to write that song. Meeropol was a Jewish music teacher and songwriter. And in seeing this photograph that was taken by Lawrence Bedelier, his photograph out in, and this was not in the South. Where this photograph was taken, ladies and gentlemen, look at that. Marion, Indiana. Now, this is not the South, mind you. So a lot of people have a misconception that lynchings only took place in the South. That's not the case.
No, wasn't necessarily just Southern.
Right. It was not necessarily Southern. In fact, very interesting. I did a live stream this past Sunday, or actually this past Thursday, where a black man was about to be lynched on some property out in Indiana, and the prosecutors actually charging him with a crime, even though
Yeah, I heard about that.
Right. So I'm not laughing at that because, of course, what the situation is not funny, but the irony of all of this and what the DA is trying to do out there is ridiculous. But yes, we'll continue talking about strange fruit now.
So one of the reasons I read the lyrics before was the imagery that's evoked, and it's very vivid. You know, the writer really conjures up very strong images. Very strong images and very strong aspects relating to the issues that revolve around lynching, not only in the South, but in some other states as well. So again, the imagery that's evoked by the songwriter here, the use of, noting blood on leaves at the root, and of course, direct connotation of actual lynched individuals who are swinging from trees, along with the idea of strange fruit or fruit and tree. So they are the strange fruit because they're found on trees, or they're found from hanging from trees. So it's striking the kind of comparison and imagery that's done when regards to this song. After all, yeah. Southern leaves bear strange fruit, right? And we know what the strange fruit is.
And this is the man who wrote the song, Abel Meeropol. That's his sons, Robert and Michael. And Meeropol was Jewish, but what's interesting is that he adopted these. There's some history there too. The two boys he adopted were Rosenberg's children. I don't know if you know the history with that, but the Rosenbergs.
Right. The Rosenbergs, of course, were I think it was Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were put on trial in the 50s for supposedly committing treason.
Correct.
Giving secrets
for the Soviet Union.
Right. And believe they were executed. It was a cause célèbre at the time. It was a major case at the time.
Yeah. Right. This is just a picture of them there, just so everybody knows. You can go look this up. See, add these little details in just so you know how history is all connected. Something's connected to something. Here you have the man who adopts Julius and Ethel Rosenberg's children, and he is the one who wrote the song Strange Fruit, which of course is tied with Billie Holiday. Just a little interesting tidbit.
That was
Yeah.
a history moment for you. Now, I also wanted to note something else. Now, Billie was also known for singing another infamous song, a song called Gloomy Sunday. This was infamous not because of race, but because of something else that was disturbing: suicide.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Gloomy Sunday was a song that was banned in some countries, on some radio stations, and in some quarters, because people that supposedly heard it and committed suicide. People were actually found with, reportedly, there were people that were found either hung or in some other form of death, self-inflicted death or suicide, with either copies of sheet music or something affiliated with the song Gloomy Sunday. I believe the writer of the song also died at one point. I think he committed suicide, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong on that. But so
Right.
that's another infamous song.
And this was it was banned by the BBC. And the ban actually had been in place until 2002. They deemed that it shouldn't be broadcast as it was detrimental to wartime morale, although they allowed performances of instrumental versions. So this was only Billie Holiday's version that they had banned.
Right.
And they say there have been urban legends connected with numerous suicides, and radio networks reacting by clearly banning the song. However, they're saying these claims are unsubstantiated. But it is true that in 1968, the composer, 35 years after writing the song, he took his own life, and the composer was Rizzo Serez, who was a Hungarian pianist and composer. Yeah. Gloomy Sunday. So she has Gloomy Sunday and she has Strange Fruit.
Right.
And these songs are not popular, but with obviously within the mainstream. And of course, it catches the interest of the United States government. And I guess we could get to that point now, Al. Who was now at this time? I believe the FBI. Yeah, the FBI was already established with J. Edgar Hoover, but this was the Department of Justice, if I'm not mistaken, that led the assault on Billie Holiday. And the gentleman in particular was Harry J. Anslinger, who was a member of the United States Treasury's Department on Federal Bureau of Narcotics. So it's not Department of Justice, but Department of Federal Bureau, the Treasury's Department's Bureau of Narcotics that led that. And that is Anslinger there.
Well, Harry Anslinger became the head of the Bureau of Narcotics, of course, and
Right.
that was a precursor to that was a precursor in regards to what has become the war on drugs, which is technically directly now headed up by the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Administration. But prior to the DEA, you had the Bureau of Narcotics, or BON, and Harry Anslinger was the head of the Bureau of Narcotics. Certainly an avowed and open racist who made the decision to target Billie Holiday and try to get her by any means necessary.
Right.
And so, in fact, to such an extent, what he did was he hired, I think he hired a black BON agent. He hired someone to become an agent and to aid in the the ability to aid in this effort to try to capture and not capture, but try to get and to eventually convict and prosecute Billie Holiday. And so this was the efforts that were done to do this were, I think, this effort to get her was took a number of years. Um, they initially began to pay off in 1947. I believe she was at the Mark Twain Hotel in San Francisco. And that's when she got swept up in a sting operation by the BON and ended up going to trial. Arrested and going to trial. Reportedly, her lawyer did not show up, which is one of
malpractice. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I don't know. I don't recall. I don't know who she hired, but when I look at some of the details of her eventual death, or not only of her life but her eventual death, this doesn't strike me as unusual. It just seemed like the fates had conspired against Billie at times, and this was one aspect where, to me, I haven't heard. You're an attorney. Is this something that often happens in cases and in trials?
For an attorney not to for an attorney to not show up at his client's trial,
Mm-hmm.
that no. If there was an emergency of some sorts where it had to be continued, perhaps, or unless they were dead, but for him to absolutely not show up to the trial, that is something that does not happen. I know, of course, there are lawyers who may forget a court date. That does happen, but no, for him to not show up to court, and the way that the movie, from what you're describing, but the way that the movie even made it out was that the lawyer uh, got Jimmy to, uh, excuse me, the lawyer basically, she paid him all of this money and paid him to do stuff, and he I guess, didn't do his job, especially when it came to her when she got acquitted once and then she got sentenced again. She thought she was going to be doing time like in a federal hospital, but they sent her to a hard prison time. This was
That's right.
something, right? No,
Yeah, she wanted, I think, to get treatment. She wanted
correct,
treatment. They sent her to a prison in West Virginia.
right, right. She wanted treatment in West Virginia, and that didn't happen. And no, so now she goes into prison, and I believe the prison she was sentenced to. Trying to think if I had it right here. Hold on, I'll find it. But this was called, and I remember watching the movie, but a movie, of course, is fictional. But yeah, I know she. Okay, so she did. She went to federal. She was sentenced to 1 year and a day of jail time, and this, of course, they don't list where. I was trying to find where she was actually sentenced to. But this was after she started singing that song Strange Fruit. And so it made her a target. And nevertheless, she does a whole year in jail, hard time. They actually have her mugshot that's available online. People can actually, see that if they want. But yeah, but this was in 1947. So she was Folsom Prison. I believe that's where it was. I could be wrong. But that's Billie Holiday, yeah, they actually had her in a mugshot. So I believe she's sent to Folsom Prison, federal prison. She does hard time. And they did use a black man uh, in the movie. It was talked about, and they did an expose on him who was used essentially to spy on Billie Holiday. But it had nothing to do with the drugs. This was about getting her to stop singing that song.
Well, I think they were kind of wrapped together, really. Part of it, I mean, I think part of it was Ann Slinger didn't like the fact that she was singing Strange Fruit. But the other, I think, was an effort to sort of sideline her and get her out of the way. She was targeted because she was prominent and she was a celebrity. She was a fairly well-known singer. So that's not unusual as well with some aspects of government agencies and law enforcement, is if some celebrities and some well-known personalities do and say things that aren't pleasing to the powers that be, they become targets. I guess one aspect of that would be John Lennon.
Right. Right. Now, after she does, and it's not uncommon that they will use uh, people that look like you to try and get at you. That's what they did even with Malcolm X, Dr. King. We saw it we saw it with Fred Hampton when they got William O'Neill, to get involved in his situation. So all of the stuff that's going on here. So eventually, after Billie gets released, she still, I guess, is able to work as a musician somewhat, but is it the same on the same level during the height of her success? This was after of course, she did Carnegie Hall. Uh, this was Alderson Federal. Okay, so I was incorrect. Alderson Federal Prison Camp. I can't believe I missed that because right in my face where she was, and she has numerous legal battles, including over contract disputes as well. Uh, Even some issues with her songs, because I look here, her lawyer in the late 50s, his name was Earl Warren Zadens. He registered with BMI only 2 songs she had written or co-written that cost her revenue. So if she wrote other songs, I'm sure that happens. Of course, it happens in the music industry. We've talked about it before with Sam Cooke. It cost her millions of dollars, possibly, or at least something where she would have even more steady or stable income. If you're talking about hit songs that you write, and she's not getting those royalties from that, that would be huge. And so by the 1950s, she starts to get heavy in her drug use, her drinking, and has relationships with abusive men. And this is at a point where in the 50s, her health also starts to take a turn for the worse, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so you see a combination of factors here. You see a combination of the drug use and the alcohol dependency, and also the pressure from the Bureau of Narcotics and their campaign against her, and their efforts to try to like I said, sideline her by trying to get her convicted, which they ended up doing in 1947. But they didn't just stop. They also came after her again. There was another occasion where because she had been released on, I think it was a good behavior back in 48. By that time, she had actually lost a cabaret license, which is a license you needed to perform as a singer or comedian or what have you in New York City. But what's interesting, of course, is that she sold out. She had a show at Carnegie Hall. She sold that out. I think she also did other sellout shows. So she continued to perform, even though she had the obstacle of not having the cabaret license because of the conviction. And again,
Yeah.
the typical pattern with um, uh, Billie Holiday was she they had at least two undercover agents, and they did about three raids at least, I think, during her life, at least trying to get her. There was another one in 1949. The thing about that was, I think, from what I understand, she like urinated in front of an agent in order to as kind of a defiant move to let them know, look, I'm clean. You know, there was nothing. There's nothing on her. Not only nothing on her, but there was nothing found in terms of substances, drugs or other substances. So they couldn't get her there. But that was rather notorious.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Derek Bailey asked, did Nixon have a list of celebrities he targeted? Yes, Nixon's enemies list. In the 60s and 70s, he did have that, but this is not, Nixon was not president right now at the time of Billie Holiday. In the 1950s, it was Harry Truman. Harry Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Well, yeah, in the late 40s it would be Harry Truman. In the 50s it would be Dwight Eisenhower. But again, like I said, just to sort of get back to that, again, you see that she had this agency of the federal government, the Bureau of Narcotics, after her, looking for any opening they could find to try to make it happen. And they did try to ensnare her in the legal system and in the criminal system once, 47. But they weren't really able to do it again that I'm aware of. But again, you have to look at this sort of government agency persecution plus uh, the influence of drugs and alcohol. Both took their toll on Billie. And uh, by the time we get to the 50s, especially, she's still working and still trying to work, but you know, the drugs like heroin that she would take, and heavy alcohol use, it took somewhat of a toll on her voice, and I would say her life as well.
Someone asked, what's up, computer robots? They wanted to know if you know what happened to her former husbands.
Well, Jimmy, let me see. I think Louis McKay was involved with the Bureau of Narcotics. So what happened was Mary Anslinger got involved with McKay in an effort to try to get lure and get Billie. As for her other husbands, not really. I never really uh, paid too much attention to her other husbands, other than as a way of noting that her love life was, I don't want to say chaotic, but difficult, troubled at times.
Right. Well, my understanding from what I read with regards to, the movie, The United States versus Billie Holiday, which Lee Daniels directed, my understanding is that Jimmy, the character guy named Jimmy Fletcher, was the one that was involved with working with Anslinger. And of course, movie and reality are two different things. You know, as they say, never let the truth get in the way of making a good movie. And supposedly he was her lover, and he regretted to the day he died his role in going after Billie. But Anslinger was allowed. He retired as drug commissioner until he reached the age of 70. He was given accommodations. uh, and Billie, of course, we know. I guess we're going to get to her death now. She passed
Yeah.
away in 1959. But before we talk about her passing away, she gets sick and ends up being put into this hospital.
Right. And
So,
she ends up. She initially, I think, collapsed, and she was sent to the Knickerbocker Hospital, and she had to. And unfortunately, she was made to wait for like over an hour, like an hour and a half, and then she was kind of written off as a drug addict. It was a driver of an ambulance that happened to recognize her, spotted her, and made sure she got transported to another hospital, which was Metropolitan Hospital. And it was there that she was treated. My understanding of her issues were that she was suffering from cardiac as well as respiratory problems, probably stemming from a lot of smoking she did. She had a number of ulcers to her leg, probably from shooting up heroin, from
right.
injections.
She had heart disease
Um,
and liver disease, apparently.
right. She also had impaired liver function, from what I understand, and what contributed to that was she had a scar tissue forming, and of course, this was all part of cirrhosis of the liver. So she
Right.
had like a number of things that were at, at fault here, not at fault, but a number of conditions, medical conditions here. So she had clear issues. It seemed like she was in a bad way, possibly. Although, I think possibly with the right care and the right treatment, maybe she could have recovered.
Like her father.
Oh, yeah. But in his case, he was suffering from mustard gas and the impact on his lungs. And so
Right.
he didn't get treatment at a VA, which is government hospital, because he was a veteran. So yeah, I mean, when you look
He
at
ended up
both,
having
there are these
pneumonia.
similarities, and I think the similarities are the treatment. In this case, in the father's case, it was how the hospital treated him. In this case, it wasn't so much the hospital treating Billie. It was what happened next, which was Anslinger found out about it and sent agents to the hospital. And that's when everything went to pot.
Right. So let's talk about that. So while she's in the hospital,
Mhm.
while she is in the hospital at this point, gravely sick, it's there, but we could say gravely sick, or at least if you're in a hospital, you're in there because you're not well. So let's say she's on a hospital bed. Agents raid her hospital room and place her under arrest.
Mm-hmm.
They literally placed her under arrest, and by placing her under arrest, they handcuffed her to her own bed,
Right.
to her hospital bed.
Right.
Now, I don't know if it goes in detail about this, but movies again, they exaggerate stuff, but they wanted her to admit her guilt from what we saw in the movie about the narcotics possession, and they wanted her to apologize for her actions, which in the movie she said she would not do. Now, let's talk about what happened as she's laying here in her hospital bed. Do you have any research, Al, from your knowledge, that something may have happened to her while she was handcuffed?
I'm not I'm not aware of what happened to her while she was handcuffed. Now, here's the problem that came with this. Like I said, I mentioned some of the issues that she had when she was there. She had respiratory issues. She had cardiac issues. She had leg ulcers because of injection of heroin. She had liver issues, probably due to scar tissue, and cirrhosis of the liver, which is serious. You know, that's kind of a drinker's condition. And what the agents did, when you mentioned they handcuffed her to the bed, they also put 2 policemen to the door. So they had 2 men at the door. So she was a virtual prisoner there. Excuse me. So basically, what occurred was that what occurred, I would say, is what they did was essentially negate treatment that might have helped her. In other words, like, she was clearly somebody taking heroin, so she was addicted to heroin to a certain extent. And what they did was put her on methadone at the hospital. They did this for about 10 days. And she started improving, because methadone is a drug normally given to as kind of a counter to heroin. To get off the heroin, you have to have, I guess, another drug that balances out. I guess enables you to make up for the fix that you need from that other drug, heroin. So she was on methadone for, I think, about 10 days. Then they cut that off. And so in the case of in her case, and they took all kinds of things. They took all, like, personal possessions out of the room, and the pretext for the arrest was that they had found like a less than an eighth or an eighth of heroin in the room, which clearly was planted, in my view.
Clearly planted.
But the tragedy in regards to Billie Holiday was that she was denied the ability to recuperate, to rest effectively, and to recover. And they made sure of that. Like I said, the BON agents made sure that was cut off. They didn't allow visitors. They didn't allow anything. It's pretty clear to me. I mean, somebody had, I think, snuck in. There's a story that a friend of hers, had snuck in, and Billie had said, they're trying to kill me, or something along that line. Whether you believe the story or not, I think it's reported to be true, but not sure. In any event, it's pretty clear that they were trying, whether it was one last time or trying at that time, to get at her once again. And I cite this because I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, even for well-known criminals. Maybe it's happened, but when you have people that have committed all kinds of crimes, they may have a policeman at the door, but I don't know if these people are handcuffed to beds. I mean, some of them might be, but denied medical treatment. I think in the end, what killed Billie Holiday was a denial of treatment, a denial of care that could have allowed her to at least recover. How far she would have lived had she at least had more methadone treatment, certainly more treatment in regards to her other issues, cardiac, respiratory, and other issues. Is unknown. I mean, I can't say. I don't have a medical chart here, and I don't have enough information about her condition. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't really say that with any as an expert. But it's clear she could have recovered to some extent. She might have even been able to get out of the hospital. But it's very clear they didn't want her to get out of that hospital.
Right. And the other thing is, they didn't want her to get out the hospital, which means if she was denied, well, here's my thing. If she was denied treatment or any type of help, then essentially they killed her as a result of it. Now, they essentially killed her. They are at the worst, they murdered her. At the best, they were negligent. It was negligent homicide, the way I look at it. Now, we have situations where someone always dies. Someone goes into a hospital, they're fine. They die mysteriously. a
Hmm.
few days later. That has happened.
Right. That's a
That
whole
gives me
other issue, but yeah.
That's a whole other issue. And yes, I would be speculating, but given the history of African Americans in this country, in regards to its relationship with members of law enforcement and in particular the United States government, it is not a far stretch, um, to say the least, that they participated in some type of cover up or they could have done this. Now, what I guess the sad thing for me is on July 15th, it says here she was given the last rites by a Catholic priest. And then on July 17th, at the age of 44, at 3:10 in the morning, she died of pulmonary edema and heart failure caused by cirrhosis of the liver. And when she died, her earnings had dwindled down to the point that she only had $1,000 left for her total estate. Her bank account only had 70 cents. And that's the shame of it all. And she was
Mhm.
managed, of course, by her husband, Louis McKay. The story of her, so the story of her burial plot and how it was managed, you can actually check that out on NPR. They have the article on it. Gilbert Milstein of the New York Times, who was the announcer at Holiday's 1956 Carnegie Hall concerts, wrote parts of the sleeve notes for the album The Essential Billie Holiday. He described her death in these sleeve notes dated 1961. Billie Holiday died in Metropolitan Hospital, New York on Friday, July 17, 1959, in the bed in which she had been arrested for illegal possession of narcotics a little more than a month before, as she lay mortally ill. In the room for which a police guard had been removed by court order only a few hours before her death, which, like her life, was disorderly and pitiful. She had been strikingly beautiful, but she was wasted physically to a small, grotesque caricature of herself. The worms of every kind of excess, drugs were only one, had eaten her. The likelihood exists that among the last thoughts of this cynical, sentimental, profane, generous, and greatly talented woman of 44 was the belief that she was to be arraigned the following morning. She would have been eventually, although possibly not that quickly. In any case, she removed herself finally from the jurisdiction of any court here below. That's uh, that's what he wrote in her album.
Yeah, I think the only way to describe it is that it was a cruel,
Just
intentionally caused death by these authorities. That they tried to stick it to her, whether they thought it was going to be one more time or in the future, but they're relentless and they're completely. These were individuals that didn't allow her. She asked, I think there was a clinic in Harlem she really wanted to be transferred to. They blocked that. They made sure she was in that hospital. They made sure that all her personal effects were taken away. They made sure she was handcuffed to the bed. They made sure that her care was denied and cut off, especially the methadone to deal with her heroin addiction. And so I think in many respects, they were not just accessories, but people involved in her death, people who created the circumstances which led to her death. And this is the death of Billie Holiday is not a death caused by drugs and alcohol, but a death caused by the benign neglect of certain parties.
yeah.
That's the sadness of it. It's a cruel and
So
harsh thing to do.
so your final take, you think that she was her cause of death essentially, you don't believe that she was, because you don't have the evidence, you don't believe she was murdered, but you believe that she was neglected. If that is that a
Well,
safe?
it's not murder. It's not direct murder. In other words, they don't have to go and use a weapon of any sort. It's sort of death by neglect. You allow someone to die.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a critical state, and you allow them to,
Or
by cutting off their care.
you accelerate it because
Right.
you arrest them. That puts, I mean, we got to also talk about this. The silent killer in this country isn't COVID-19. It's actually not to take away from it that it is, but before all of that, we used to talk about how stress was the silent killer of people because stress can cause damage to people's heart. It certainly could cause damage to your brain, to your function, basic functions that we do every day. And for Billie, who is suffering already from heart disease and cirrhosis of the liver, the fact that she would have to be arrested and handcuffed to a bed, how humiliating that is. You're not able to walk around your own hospital room. Even you have to stay confined to a bed, and obviously have people call people to use the restroom to help you. So, it's a sad situation all around. There is a caveat to this, and as to Billie Holiday's legacy. She was actually the favorite singer of another icon who, in Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra actually had some interesting things to say about Billie Holiday upon her death. He actually told Ebony Magazine the following. He said, with very few exceptions, every major pop singer in the United States during her generation has been touched in some way by her genius. It is Billie Holiday who was and still remains the greatest single musical influence on me. Lady Day is unquestionably the most important influence on American popular singing in the last 20 years. This is Old Blue Eyes saying this about Billie Holiday. If I'm not mistaken, he was an honorary pallbearer at her funeral back on July 21st, 1951, at the Church of St. Paul the Apostle, where she was laid to rest. And yeah, so that's very interesting coming from Frank Sinatra, but he had a lot of respect for her.
Mm-hmm. Right. She was and is a very influential singer, not just as a jazz singer, but a singer overall as a recording artist. And the details of her death, again, the final thing I want to stress, I think Milstein's notes on the album don't do Billie justice. Again, you have to understand the circumstances of her life. You have to understand the harsh life she had as a child. You have to understand that her self-medication in regards to drugs and alcohol, were a way of coping with this and a way of dealing with this. She just wasn't some drug addict. She just wasn't some alcoholic. And she shouldn't be seen as such or written off as such. She is someone who was allowed to die under circumstances no one should go through in a hospital, regardless of what they've done.
Right. And to what you're saying too, I mean, if they wanted to have a guard at the door, that's one thing, but you have her handcuffed to the bed, which I can't fathom. I've seen it before where people are handcuffed to a bed with their arms and so forth. One hand is cuffed to it, but they handcuffed her by her feet. Like an animal. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You handcuffed her and restrained her. They basically, it was one final middle finger to her by Harry Anslinger. And by the way, I don't know, I believe there are things we're talking about this age of cancel culture and so forth. We're taking down names of Confederate generals and soldiers, removing statues. Don't you think that these racists like Harry Anslinger, known racist, and J. Edgar Hoover, I'm talking about, should be taken down if we're going to go that route?
Well, Harry Anslinger is not well known. J. Edgar Hoover is known. Harry Anslinger is not well known because most people don't know about the Bureau of Narcotics. So I agree. His reputation should be examined and uh, exposed for the uh, racist one that it is. But in his case, he's a rather minor figure, a relative minor figure when you compare him to someone like J. Edgar Hoover, who's well known
Well, that's true.
historically as head of the FBI.
That's very true, but I'm looking at it from a perspective too, because we have Confederate soldiers, Confederate soldier statues that were in front of courthouses that people are talking about even being removed. Those statues have been up there in memory of people that have fought in the Confederacy. I'm talking about soldiers. Of course, they have the generals like Robert E. Lee and PTG Beauregard, who was out here in City Park. Jeff Davis, a few other. I can go on, but yeah, I agree. He's a lesser known, but this guy, yes, his history should be re-examined. We know J. Edgar Hoover's history, especially his role with Dr. assassination. And also they're even talking about it. I don't know if you saw the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, where I think there was some debate that was sparked about taking down his name from the FBI building, but I don't know where that has been. It's interesting how things get heated for a few months, and then all of a sudden something else happens in the world. Everybody stops talking about it. Now everyone's focused obviously on this Delta variant, COVID-19, and Andrew Cuomo resigning and so forth. But before Andrew Cuomo resigned from sexual harassment allegations, he had a scandal with regards to the nursing homes, and I talked about that in my latest video. But the point being is, people's minds are always changing.
Right.
Something always distracts us.
Well, again, thank you for having me on the show to talk about this.
Yeah. So he died in 1975. Thank you, Kimmel. I appreciate it. Yeah, he died from heart failure. Yeah. And the tragedy of it all, Billy was still young. 44 years old is a young age. That's and tragic. It's tragic when we have our entertainers as well that die young. Al, I will not. Go ahead. I'm gonna let you have the final word.
Well, it is, and like I said, it's a death that probably not only shouldn't have occurred, but needn't occurred if not for the blatant racism and outright cruelty of Harry Anslinger and his Bureau of Narcotics agents.
That's a topic for another story. Computer robots. And you asked about Natalie Wood.
Yeah, I can't touch on that one now. But again, my thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you, Brother Al. And, that might give us an idea for the next show. I have some that are going off in my head that you might be interested in, and we could talk about a little bit more. But tonight was about honoring the lady who sang the blues, Miss Billie Holiday, and her story. And there are ways, obviously, you can support Billie Holiday, and that's by reading more about her life story and also sharing that with others, playing her music. Even though her family, I don't know if her family has control of that or anything, if I'm not mistaken, but if so, if you do some research in her, you can find her on YouTube. I saw some performances from her. Watch a YouTube video of Lady Day singing Strange Fruit. She was singing it live on the Tonight Show. So you all should check that out. But that might be another idea. See, now that Computer Robots brings that up, other people are talking in it as well. Derek Bailey said Anslinger is the reason marijuana is a Schedule I drug and all the bans on it. Yes, he is. Yeah, at that time he was. Still is. Yeah. Well, Al, I won't keep you. Want to tell everybody where you can find you, Al, on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at at Critic INC. That's at Critic INC on Twitter. I'm on my blog is at medium.com/at the Dr. 50. That's medium.com/at the Dr. 50. That's for my blog. And brand new is I'm on Substack, so you can look up the first article I've written there. That's albertlanier.substack.com, and of course that's substack.com. Again, that's albertlanier.substack.com, and that's substack.com. That's my new Substack, or I'm new to Substack. So
You're
once
new to
again, thank you all for having me.
Thank you. And this has been another edition of Gavin Richard Presents here on channel GBoo2786 on Gavin Richard and on Twitter via Periscope. Join me for my next live stream this Thursday. Of course, Sean will stop by. I don't know if we'll have another guest, but we're going to be talking about a host of different stuff, ladies and gentlemen. And tune in. I got a video dropping later tonight about the resignation of Andrew Cuomo. All right, guys, I'll holla. Peace.